You love everywhere you encounter these myths, except in the Bible. What if the story of Christ is myth, but it just happened to happen in a particular time and place? At its most fundamental, what myth is a story that tells an eternal truth. It says at some point you come to a cliff and you either stop or you take the leap of faith. And that is what Christianity is. For men in particular, it's fundamentally a core part of our masculine heart to seek adventure. We've been doing it for years and years and years.
Yeah.
There's something in us that requires adventure, which requires us going places where faith is required, where we don't have the answers.
Abraham Lincoln said, "It has been my experience that people who have no vices have very few virtues." What does that mean? How do you rectify that?
I think he's probably referencing the fact that the people that tell you they have no vices have no virtues. Jung has this quote about no tree can reach to heaven unless its roots reach to hell. If you think about the idea of transformation as treasure, what treasures have you found since embarking on this hero journey of your own?
Noah, thanks for coming on, man.
Dude, I'm excited to be here. I feel like the first time of being full transparency, the first time the book was either just come out or it was about to come out. And I was still getting my feet wet in terms of public speaking and practicing speaking about the ideas in the book. So I don't feel as articulate as I would have liked to have been. But it was a great opportunity, a great conversation nonetheless. So excited to redo it.
Yeah, I very much so enjoyed that conversation. I think it was right before you did the book launch.
Yeah.
I really devoured this thing. You can tell by it's literally falling apart, notes everywhere. I want to say this actually before we get into the actual book. I love this book. I thought it was incredible. I appreciate you writing it because there are concepts in this book that have absolutely changed my perception of things. And I think that's a pretty cool thing to be responsible for on your end, right? I mean, I would hope so at least.
Yeah, I appreciate that, man. It's
Yeah.
always, I struggle to accept compliments when you hear them, but that means a lot, more than you know. Yeah, thank you for saying that.
Yeah, we'll get into it, but off the top of my head, I can think of 3 or 4. I reference this a lot too. I don't know if you listen to every episode. You surely do not, but I reference History of a Hero a lot because there are a handful of concepts that, without question, I come to mind when certain topics come up, and I'm like, oh, I remember when I learned this from here, and this from here. So
I start the book out with a line from C.S. Lewis that I'm going to start every single book out that talks about I don't come as an expert, I come as an amateur who might share the lights that I've gained and lessons I've learned. Because these ideas aren't just ideas I love. These ideas have fundamentally changed my life and my trajectory and the way I view the world, and have done more than any other thing in terms of getting me to where I am and influencing sort of how I operate. And so it was just this idea of sharing my work, so to speak, inviting people into the process of how my mind has developed. Even in the process of writing the book, the ideas that I was working into the book were working in me and transforming me and sort of holding me to a higher standard. That's one of the crazy things about writing a book, not to go on a tangent right away, but one of the things that I love about writing that it forces you to do, or even a podcast, to be honest, I'm sure you experience this. Once you start talking about these things, talking about ideas, you start to get a vision for who you want to be, who you hope to be. And then suddenly there's this ambient light that sort of hangs above your life. And you start to realize, I have to change my life. If I'm going to continue talking about these things on a podcast, if I'm going to continue writing about these things, I can only put up with that dissonance for so long. My life has to change. So that's what I love about writing. And I'm sure you experience some of that in podcasting too.
Absolutely. That's a great point. I have recently, I started a newsletter a couple months ago. Even that alone,
it's great. I've read them.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
It's even that alone is a helpful process. It's a goal of mine at some point to do it. What you're doing. This is we have in front of us your second book. You're working on a third, which we can get into. But you wanted to start with the particular part of the book. We can go ahead and get into that.
Yeah. So I mentioned the quote from C.S. Lewis that it's going to be a part of every book. Another thing that I would like to make a part of every book is something called the invocation. Just quick background. So it's in the tradition of Homer when he says, "Sing, O Muse." That's how he opens the Iliad. And then, there's the story of Achilles. And then that's how he opens the Odyssey. And then there's the story of Odysseus. Then you also have Milton saying something similar, but he invokes the heavenly muse before he tells Paradise Lost. Muses were these 9 sisters in Greek mythology, the daughters of memory and Zeus. And so memory is like Plato had this idea that all knowledge is remembering. It's not, it's just like my artistic philosophy in general is we don't create anything. We just listen and transcribe. We translate. And the best artists, poets, are the ones that empty themselves and let that spirit move through them most freely. That's fundamentally my philosophy behind art and creation in general. And whatever that is for anybody, whether it's writing, podcasting, painting, dancing, I think the flourishing of the human spirit, the human being fully alive, is whatever that spirit possesses you to do, allowing that to live in the world as unobstructed as possible. But in the tradition of invoking the muse, it's something I like to include at the beginning. I've written a different one for all of the beginnings of my book, and it's just a way to invite, the heavenly spirit, like the Holy Spirit. The one of the things before my book launch, and I'm convinced, for whatever reason, I felt like something did possess me in my book launch because I've never felt that locked in.
Yeah, you talking about the one that we did?
Yeah,
that you did
at
Star Lighthouse.
And it was it literally felt like something else had was working in me and through me. And I'm not. That sounds weird to say it. I'm not trying to be like, oh, my book launch was great, but that's how it felt. And I'm convinced it was because I right before I went on, I was just said, not my will, but your will be done. And that's a different version of the muse, of allowing something higher than you to sort of work through you and be like, okay, whatever direction you want to go. I also want to start incorporating that in when I go on podcasts, because it is like that, a conversation at its best, it goes where the spirit wants to take it.
Sure.
And so I'll just read the invocation for my second book. There's a lot of references hidden in here, but I'm not gonna pause.
Yeah.
I will leave them for Easter eggs so that anybody that wants to pick apart my invocation. Like Lincoln, I pray, my sword the pen. I'll wield it for good, only God knows when. But if today be the day that she speaks from within, pen in hand, now I say, my muse, let's begin. Sing of the excellence labored long for by men. Tell of their courage, of where and of when. Show us their beauty, that light and that vim. Pen in hand, once again, my muse, let's begin.
I love that. That's did you write that?
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's powerful.
So one of my favorite exercises when I do sort of these men's retreats, quarterly men's retreats, one of the favorite exercises that I've come up with is this exercise of writing your own invocation in terms of thinking about your life. If you had to sing a song, if I'm a poet and I had to invoke your song, the Song of Nolan, through the muse, what would I have to say? So when Homer invokes the muse to tell the story of the Odyssey, he basically says, sing, O muse, of the man of twists and turns of fate who long endured. That's how he describes it. And then the whole idea is the muse knows then, oh, he wants me to help him tell the story of Odysseus. Or in the Iliad, it's sing, O muse, of the rage, of Odysseus's wrath and rage. So it's if you think about that, think about what would I have to say if I was to tell the story of Nolan, write your biography. What would I have to say to invoke your story?
Interesting.
And then thinking about it, not only what it is currently, but what do you want it to be? And that's this whole idea of writing your own story. How 100 years from now, somebody wants to tell a story of Nolan. What are they asking the muse? Sing, O muse, of a man, fill in the blank.
That's a powerful exercise. I like the idea of a eulogy. It's similar.
Same thing.
Reminds me of that. It's what do you want people to say when you're gone? How do you want your memory to be evoked in their minds, which is powerful.
But that's the muses, right?
Yeah.
That's the memory, the daughters of memory.
Yeah.
That's the whole idea.
There's a lot of this is one of the things which I want to get into myth. So it's called A Trail This Way to the Stars: A History of the Hero. One thing that I found to be fascinating was the idea of myth in general, because we think of myth and it's it's some fairy tale or fantastical story. It's great, yeah, there's myths all the time, the Greek myths, all this stuff. What I realized after reading this is that, and there's somewhere in this book I highlighted a line where it's perhaps myth is the truest of the things, perhaps more true than the things that are right in front of us right now. I want to read this little excerpt. This is from, I believe, C.S. Lewis, and this is about myth. Myth does not essentially exist in words at all. We all agree that the story of Balder is a great myth, a thing of inexhaustible value. But of whose version, whose words, are we thinking when we say this? For my own part, the answer is that I am not thinking of anyone's words. No poet, as far as I know or can remember, has told this story supremely well. I am not thinking of any particular version of it. If the story is anywhere embodied in words, that is almost an accident. What really delights and nourishes me is a particular pattern of events, which would equally delight and nourish if it had reached me by some medium which involved no words at all.
Yeah, it's from Myth Made Fact by C.S. Lewis.
What it's kind of hard to articulate what that means, but
Yeah.
like what is myth? Like what is as simple or as complicated? You can make it?
So you kind of have to give examples to like make this make sense. But effectively what he's saying is myth is greater than any specific historical fact and circumstance. You could even think about this in the context of somebody we know to be true, like Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln is man in the sense that we know facts about his life, but he's also assumed the status of myth because there are things, there are characteristics, there are stories we tell about him where it's like they're probably not 100% accurate, but it's now ascended into this status of sort of the myth of Abraham Lincoln. You could see Job as something similar. You could see the book of, like you could see Daniel in the Bible as something similar. So what myth is fundamentally, and it goes back to this idea of like, originally there's this idea of like mythos and logos in the ancient Greek world. And so myth just means, it can mean a lot of different things. Like we think about it, definitionally, we think about it as myth meaning false, a synonym with false. Mm. But myth just means repeating pattern. Myth means something that we see over and over again. So like when we think about any of the myths are mirrors, like that's something I'd talk about in the book. This idea that when we see a myth play out, what we're watching is the patterns that work inside of us. Campbell would say something like the mystery of the energies inside of us. That is what is happening in a myth, in the character of a myth, whether it's the Odyssey, whether it's Shakespeare, whether it's even the stories in the Bible. The fact that something can be historically true, if it is also true beyond that specific time, place, circumstance, then it becomes a myth, even if it once happened in real life. And that's C.S. Lewis's point in Myth Made Fact, is he's saying Balder was this like fertility god in ancient Greece. He's the god of the corn. And so it's like the dying and rising of the corn. So it's kind of this resurrection myth. So C.S. Lewis, after this conversation with Tolkien that eventually caused C.S. Lewis or helped C.S. Lewis to convert, he's trying to make this case that, listen, you love everywhere you encounter these myths except in the Bible. And he's like, what if the story of Christ is myth, all of these myths, but it just happened to happen in a particular time and place? Not only that, but it can still also be a myth in that it is always happening. And so there is this thought that like, if it's ex nihilo nihil fit, is from nothing comes nothing. And so there is this idea of what put it in our imagination if it never happened or never will happen. Why does it exist? Why do we think about it? You can also think about it in the context of heaven. It's like, if there is no heaven, what is this yearning for? Mm-hmm. So it's like something had to put this in our mind. What would the evolutionary sort of reason for heaven be? And and you could say it's like eternity and all those things. But anyway, that to come back to your question, at its most fundamental, what myth is a story that tells an eternal truth. That's it.
Simply put, a story that tells an eternal truth. One thing that I love that. One thing that when I read this, and this is pretty much the premise of the book, there's all these different mythical stories throughout time, across cultures that sometimes had zero communication with each other, zero influence, yet they tell damn near the same story.
Yeah.
And so that, I think, is like that helped me conceptualize the idea that, perhaps there is this thing that's sort of pervading across humanity that's not necessarily like actual fact, if that makes sense. Like how can somebody across the world in a different time with no influence on the other come up with a story with the same type of characters, the same plot and arc, and the same conclusion?
Yeah. I mean, so this is a lot of what my third book is about and why it's called. So my third book's called A Tao Beyond Time. Tao translates to way.
In what language is that?
Tao is Chinese, but it's
Okay.
based off of. So my first book, I end with C.S. Lewis, and the book I end with is Abolition of Man, and he refers to the Tao or Tao. He refers to that as the universal way in which the world works, and he calls it the Tao because he's making a reference to Eastern philosophy, and he's basically he's expressing something about the universality of these principles. And what he's saying, because all abolition of man is all about our removing objectivity from the world and making everything subjective. When we do that, we lose something. We no longer become man. When we overemphasize the quantitative and what we can measure versus the qualitative experience of what is true, good, and beautiful, then there's something in the human soul and heart that gets hollowed out. So that man's last frontier becomes man himself. That's his whole point. Is that in losing these things, we lose ourselves and we lose the experience of being human. And he uses Tao in that book to express sort of this stream that runs through all of this undercurrent that runs through all of humanity, irrespective of culture, religion. And so we can also talk about that in the context of the Nuremberg trials. And you might think of it like natural law, like laws that isn't written down. Nuremberg trials, Nazis commit these atrocities. What law do you hold them accountable on? You can't.
Yeah.
There is no law. So it literally required all of the world to come together and say, hey, these are war crimes that violated some natural law that isn't written down. Lewis would say that's the Tao at work. Ecclesiastes calls it the eternity that's written on every human heart. It's kind of the same thing. Proverbs talks about chokmah is the Hebrew word, and that's what gets deployed by God when he says, let there be light. Wisdom was with God at the beginning of the world, and then he sends it out. So it pervades everything. It's the animating spirit. You could say that it's also sort of the idea of the Holy Spirit in general, sort of covering everything. It exists everywhere. One of the reasons I love C.S. Lewis, and quote him many, many times, is he had this idea that myth, part of myth made fact of what you quoted, was there's intimations. So he obviously being Christian, you can read myths and characters as Greeks especially as foreshadowings of Christ. So they're like incomplete pictures. There's the line about we see dimly what we will one day see face to face. And we could talk about that in the context of these myths propping up all over the world, is because we all are seeing something outside of us dimly. And we are trying to drag that into a picture, into the world. We're trying to make that manifest in the form of story. We have these vague notions of something that exists up here. And artists, regardless of culture, religion, time, and place, there's a sense of that something, and they're trying to pull it into the world. Jung might call this something like the collective consciousness, or you might call it something like the logos spermatikoi, which is just the divine seed that is everywhere and that wants to grow. And so there is a through line between everybody. And this is where we get into really weird. We can start to talk about how science is starting to validate some of these unseen things when we talk about things like quantum entanglement and the idea that one atom on this side of the universe can influence this atom. So it's like there are unseen forces at work in the world that, if we're being honest with ourselves, can only be known through intuition at this point. And so to dismiss those things and place too much reliance on reason is what is creating a lot of the problems that we're seeing today.
Yeah, first off, that's like very well said. I think the idea of like intellectualizing something, I talked about this with Nick on Wednesday, but the idea that I firmly believe that the truest things, perhaps myth being an example, are the things that humans can't intellectualize.
Yeah.
Meaning like the paradox, or I always derive this or draw this back to Matthew McConaughey's use of the mandorla in his life. Do you know what that is?
No.
It's like the almond shape that's basically like the middle of a Venn diagram. It's the two things that are opposite. It's where they're one. It's
point.
the paradox essentially.
Yeah.
So like the idea that the truth is in the paradox, the things that don't seem to make sense to our human intellect.
Yeah.
Like quantum entanglement. Like that doesn't make sense to us. We can't that doesn't make any sense that an atom over here can influence this atom.
Yeah.
We can't intellectualize that, at least not yet. And to me, that's proof of the fact that those things that we cannot intellectualize, like a myth, are the truest things.
Yeah.
If that makes any sense.
No, it does. You should look up the C.S. Lewis, The Apologist's Prayer. And while you're looking that up, all I'll say is one of my favorite philosophers who I didn't give an entire dissection to in my first book, but I feel like I betrayed him because he's one of my favorites. Blaise Pascal is this French philosopher, 1600s. He's a mathematician, philosopher. He's just all around genius. Pensées, I don't know how you say it in French. It means thoughts. That's his most famous book. And in that he says, the heart has its reasons that reason knows nothing of. Which is him saying, basically, there are places that intuition can take us. There's a level that intuition can take us. This is also what faith is. This is why faith is a theological virtue. This is Kierkegaard also. His Knight of Faith says at some point you come to a cliff and you either stop or you take the leap of faith. And that is what Christianity is it sort of exists over here. Understanding that we understand it. Like as a Christian, it's like I understand that there is a chasm between these two cliffs and it requires a leap of faith. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that I can prove without a shadow of a doubt these things to a rational mind. I can't. But that's why I'm a Christian, is because that's where faith comes into play.
Faith is the bridge.
Faith is the bridge. Exactly. But it's not even a bridge. There is no bridge.
It's like the invisible bridge. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like it's the propulsion that gets you from one side to the other. Maybe I don't even know if that makes sense, but I have another thought on faith. I'll mention before I read this Apologist Evening Prayer. The idea that faith is not necessary in sterile environments. It's only necessary in the wilderness. Because, like you said, if we try to rationalize or intellectualize and quantitatively assess everything as humans, then what's the point of faith? Like if you asked a person in New York City who's got every meal right there, who's got every bit of shelter and food and every necessity of life taken care of them, that person's need for faith compared to, let's say, a settler on the frontier or like an American Indian tribe that has we'll see if there's bison over this hill. We'll find out. We don't know where it's going to come from. Faith is what would compel that tribe, in my opinion, to go over that hill, to keep going. This is why I think that a lot of humans are lost, because they don't have the need for that, if that makes sense.
It does. And all I'll say on that is, like, in the theme of the hero's journey, this is also the call to adventure. Like, what are you missing out on if you're not doing things in your life that require faith? If everything is predictable and comfortable, there's no sense of adventure. And for men in particular, it's fundamentally a core part of our masculine heart to seek adventure. We've been doing it for years and years and years. It goes back to the earliest, the Iliad and the Odyssey.
Yeah.
There's something in us that requires adventure, which requires us going places where faith is required, where we don't have the answers, going into the unknown. Otherwise, we're missing a large chunk of our potential.
As you would say in the back half of this book, when you get into the nights, entering the forest where there is no path would be the way of saying that, I think.
Oh, for sure.
The Apologist Evening Prayer, it's the one that starts from all my lame.
Yeah, read it. Yeah.
This is the Apologist Evening Prayer by C.S. Lewis. From all my lame defeats, and oh, much more, from all the victories that I seem to score, from cleverness shot forth on thy behalf, at which, while angels weep, the audience laugh, from all my proofs of thy divinity, thou who wouldst give no sign, deliver me. Thoughts are but coins, let me not trust instead of thee, their thin-worn image of thy head. From all my thoughts, even from my thoughts of thee, O thou fair silence, fall and set me free. Lord of the narrow gate and needle's eye, take from me all my trumpery, lest I die. Okay, what does that mean?
Yeah, I mean, so like if you were to read it again, it would click. Like the first time you read it, you have to like think about it. But what he's saying here is you have to also remember this in the context of C.S. Lewis's story. He was the staunchest atheist for the longest part of his life. He calls himself the most reluctant convert. He had every reason not to believe, and he slowly came to belief. And part of the reason he couldn't believe is because his mind was in his way. Reason was in the way. He kept thinking himself in circles. The apologist's prayer is effectively about him not wanting to slide back into letting reason take the reins too much. And this is where it's a constant sort of like pinging of himself, a daily reminder of, hey, you don't need all the answers. You're not going to have all the answers. And this, as soon as you start, this is also one of the fundamental warnings of the West. And I talk about it a little bit in this book when I talk about Mephistopheles. Goethe's Faust is the story of a man of science he's come to know everything that there is to know about the world. I'm not going to get into the details, but he basically makes a deal with the devil and then loses his soul. But it's a cautionary tale about where reason leads us if we follow it and follow it alone. If our loyalty is to our reason, to an extreme, that's when we start to come something less than man.
Yeah, a little allusion to, is it in Matthew where Jesus says, for what does it profit a man to gain the world and lose his soul, or something 100%. Like that? That's interesting. Okay, I want to go back to the book. So the two things that you define at the beginning are myth and hero. And I think you also define hero's journey as well. But I want to read this excerpt from the section about the definition of hero. If there had been no real heroes, there would have been created imaginary ones, for men cannot live without them. The hero is just as necessary as the farmer, the sailor, the carpenter, and the doctor. Society could not get on without him. There have been a great many different kinds of heroes, for in every age, among every people, the hero has stood for the qualities that were most admired and sought after by the bravest and best. And all ages and people have imagined or produced heroes as inevitably as they have made plows for turning the soil, or ships for getting through the water, or weapons with which to fight their enemies. To be some kind of hero has been the ambition of spirited boys from the beginning of history. And if you want to know what the men and women of a country care for most, you must study their heroes. To the boy, the hero stands for the highest success. To the grown man and woman, he stands for the deepest and richest life. And that is from, Hamilton Wright, maybe, Heroes Every Child Should Know. I think that's a pretty good definition of hero. What are your thoughts?
No, yeah. I mean, hero is such a hard, amorphous word to define. I love Emerson, and Emerson has this line that he says, the hero is he who is immovably centered, which is, when you talk about a hero, it's like you have to talk about it in statements. There's probably like 5 to 10 statements. And so I think the hero is a symbol of the ideal. A hero is he who is immovably centered. What that means to me is it's like the vitalized revitalizes. It's this idea that the person, whether it's Socrates or Jesus, whoever it is, the figure, Lincoln, it doesn't matter. It's somebody that is so centered and rooted in their conviction that sort of everything that's happening about them can't move them. Their loyalty is to the eternal alone. That's it. That is the hero. It's the hero who sort of stands above and beyond time, so to speak, to sort of insulate themselves from the winds of the ages, while not totally being disconnected from it. And then sort of is able to stand firm in those convictions when it's unpopular, when it causes untold amounts of pain. They suffer the slings of arrows on behalf of everybody, not only everybody in their community, but Lincoln and Washington will both say for the unborn millions. So they're not only standing as a protector, because the original Greek word for hero is protector. So when we thought about it, it's like this is Hector in Troy, this is Achilles in the Iliad. And so originally that was in these cultures that idolized war and warriors and overemphasized that aspect of the masculine psyche. Protector was what it predominantly meant, and then it's slowly shifted. One of the reasons you mentioned knights, and one of the reasons I love C.S. Lewis again. It's gonna be like an all-time record for like C.S. Lewis mentioned on the podcast. But as I've been writing my Substack, so much of it comes or like riffs off of Lewis. So in the Knights, in King Arthur, in the Knights, C.S. Lewis has an essay called "On the Necessity of Chivalry," and he talks about the progression from the earliest heroes were warriors, people like Achilles and Odysseus, and So it emphasized that aspect of man. And this was also sort of man's nature in general. We were very hostile. It was what you call like might makes right, sort of lifestyle, where whoever had the power, they were the ones that got to determine the rules. And that sort of person was held up as the best warriors were the heroes, because that was how society operated. But then we start to move into, after Greece, then we get the rise of Rome and Christianity kind of simultaneously, and then it blends together, and then you have these streams all come together. And then from that, we enter into the Middle Ages. King Arthur legends come from around 500. So we're at the height of the tradition, the coming together of the Greek world, the Saxon world, the Roman world, the Christian world. And C.S. Lewis calls the night not nature, but a work of art. And why he calls it a work of art is because it blends two things, meekness and boldness, that are not natural. But there is something in us. There is an ideal that speaks to us. Again, that sort of ambient, permeating thing that tells us, oh, this is right. And so it's up. Suddenly, the hero becomes a work of art. It's no longer just the most famous. It's no longer the strongest. It's no longer the best warrior. But it suddenly becomes a more well-rounded person who not only can fight and is strong, but is also charitable and wise. And you sort of enter all of these other aspects. And slowly, the idea of a hero becomes more of a work of art. Now, the trick with it is, and this is just hard, and just because it's hard doesn't mean it shouldn't be done, and doesn't mean the idea is invalid. But because of what heroism is in general, that also means it's susceptible to manipulation and propaganda. An example of this is Hercules and the Minotaur. So the Minotaur comes from Crete, and there is a decent amount of scholarly talk about Theseus and Crete, Theseus and the Minotaur, and this idea that Theseus was a champion of Athens, and the Athenian people thought very highly of themselves, and they thought the Cretan people were savages. The people of Crete were savages, and so read that way, you sort of see Theseus as this sort of champion, heroic person, wisdom, wise, good. When he goes and slays the Minotaur is a symbol in some ways of how the Athenians viewed the Cretan people. And so there's
animalistic and things.
Exactly. Below them, savages. And they sort of use that as an animating myth behind mobilizing people to sort of like, oh yeah, as Theseus conquered Crete, like so should we, that sort of thing. So myths can be mobilized in ways that are nefarious. And so we have to be careful about that. We have to be honest about that. And that's why you have to have discussions and make sure that that's not happening in myth. That happens in Homer too. But it can be that, and also say something true about the human heart and true about the human experience. Because you can also read Theseus as a way of like the Minotaur representing the beast and animalistic within us. It doesn't have to be two different
external
islands.
people. Yeah,
exactly.
Maybe they're both in
yeah,
us.
100%. But this is where Nietzsche's statement about he who fights monsters becomes a monster, like must take care that he does not become a monster, because there is this desire as human beings to take what we're feeling internally and project that into the external world. So this war we're experiencing happening in our heart, all of a sudden we want that to play out on the world stage. And that's how everything happens. Everything starts in the inner world and is a project. And Plato would say that the city is like the man in the Republic, which is a different way of saying the city is a macrocosm of the man, which is the microcosm. So everything can sort of scale up to the level of the universe and down to the level of man in terms of everything that's happening in here. This is also the Hermetic principle of as above, so below. Because
I am nothing, I'm everything.
Exactly. So how this is structured is how our outer world gets structured. Yeah. So there's a lot of things at play in terms of like trying to really pinpoint a definition of a hero. But I don't know how we got from there.
I mean, it makes sense to me. Well, there's two things. One thing you mentioned early on, in that is like you referenced reason again, like the the hero is the person who, like, people will try to reason out of, but he's immovable. There's a quote, I believe it's by George Bernard Shaw, if that's his name. You've probably heard it. It's something to the effect of, the reasonable man persists in trying to conform himself to the world. The unreasonable man persists in trying to conform the world to him. Therefore, all progress is dependent on the unreasonable man.
Yeah.
I just thought that was an interesting correlation, because we literally just mentioned how, like,
No, that's right.
the human, like, we'll try to reason our way into things, but it's actually the people who are unreasonable who will move mountains.
It's also, I mean, you recognize this, so it goes without saying. But that's also why we need other people in our lives, because it's not an excuse to be stubborn.
Mm-hmm.
We can still be wrong. And that's one of the things I talk about in the book also, is this idea that, like, one of the reasons we need myth is to lift us outside of ourself and our own experience. Because the blessing and curse, whatever you want to call it, of being human, is we can never see something with anything other than our own eyes. There's this idea that we don't see the world as it is, we see it as we are.
It's a mirror, like you said.
Exactly. And so we do have to be a little bit careful in terms of, because you could see how somebody might use that to justify their stubborn ways and not being open to feedback. So there's something about having conviction, but open to criticism and feedback and change. That's also an essential element, because that's also sort of like, if you're thinking about it in the context of, like, the leader in general, there is an element of, you have to be open to feedback from the outside without compromise. That's the thing.
But all this to me is like, it's two qualities that are necessarily separate. It's the middle that is
100%.
But, like, we go back. I don't know. I don't need to. I want to really figure out how to articulate what it is that I'm thinking when I say that. I want to really
read
explain.
Aristotle. Read Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics.
Okay.
And
Noted.
It's the idea of, like, the golden mean, the middle way, the middle path. This is also why I love one of the stories in Odysseus, Scylla and Charybdis, and he's told to fly the middle way. It's the story of Icarus. He's told by his dad to fly the middle way. The Greeks love this idea of, like, everything is the golden mean, everything is between vice and virtue. And you find, well, even all virtues to an extreme become advice. So you can even talk about that in the context of courage, literally anything.
Yeah.
And it's a principle you see pervade absolutely everything. It's our ability to reconcile seemingly contradictory ideas and what we view as opposites that actually pull us in a direction that is something like the right middle way. So that's also been mythologized for years.
The middle way. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
The middle way. So that's a little bit about myth hero. I want to see what's next. I mean, I have
fly the middle way. Otherwise, your wings melt when you get too
I
close
have
to
so
something.
many notes in this thing. Where is the hero's journey one? Let's see. Dude, I mentioned this on Wednesday too. I love quotes. I love stories.
Same.
They're one of the ways that I articulate and think about things and formulate ideas. So I reference quotes all the time. It's probably like a joke around, like, behind my back with my friends, honestly. I literally quote people all the time. It's how I think of things. It's how things stay top of mind for me. And that's one of the reasons I love this book. Like, there's just so many quotes.
Yeah.
It's awesome. But so the myth, hero's journey, which is really, like, inseparable. Like, it's a part of those two things in a way.
Yeah.
I'm not going to read anything specific on this, but there's this idea that there's 4 parts of the hero's journey. There's the return, the separation, which are in the sphere of known.
Yeah, so stage 1 is separation.
Oh, okay. So separation is stage 1, and that's in the sphere of known.
Yep.
Then you go down to the unknown to stage 2 of descent. From descent, still in the unknown, you go to initiation. From initiation, you go back to the known to the return.
Yeah.
And now that I'm saying this, I guess that kind of, I just thought of the vital revitalizes.
Yeah.
Like, it's like just this never-ending cycle. What are, if we could go over a little bit, just briefly on each one of those stages, and then I want to start getting into these actual stories. But, like, what is what is separation? What's stage 1?
Yeah, so I'll answer your question, I promise. But just
No,
just
dude,
like for a little bit of context, the reason that the upper half is the known world, and then the lower half is the unknown, because that's exactly what we're talking about. The unknown world is where faith is required, among other things. But there's this constant integration. The hero's journey is about this integration. I think about this in an image that I love is, you could think about it in the context of you're a farmer. I use the image of an ever widening circle, but this is a similar thing. You're a farmer and you have a fence, and that everything inside that fence represents the known. The whole point of the hero's journey, and inside that fence, you're protected from all the animals on the outside. You're protected from snakes, from the beasts, to a certain extent. You're protected from everything out there. You know exactly what's inside. The whole point of the hero's journey, going beyond that, is then when you come back, you move the fence back a little bit. And so there's this interplay between constantly sort of going out into the unknown, grabbing something there that's vital, integrating it, and expanding your territory. So here, the farm is like the soul, meaning as the farmer would expand his farm by moving the fence outward to have more territory, that is what happens with the human spirit and soul when we go on these journeys into the unknown, find something, and then integrate it into our being. That's this idea of this ever widening circle. That's the point of the hero's journey. And so the first stage, and people have made this into like 12 stages. They've really broken it down, but I try to condense it to its most vital pieces. Mm-hmm. And so separation is how every single story starts. And this is, you can think about this in The Hobbit, for instance. One of the characteristic features of hobbits in Tolkien's universe is that they love their houses. They don't like adventure. They like to just be comfortable and cheer and be merry and have gatherings. So that's why it's particularly admirable that Bilbo in The Hobbit goes out of the Shire where it's a perfectly comfortable life, because eventually what is outside will come to the Shire if nothing is done about it. So it's like our fence, whatever it is, isn't impenetrable. The enemies outside will eventually come. Barbarians will always eventually break through the gate. And so it's a much better approach to be proactive and go on the offense. So the separation is when we are separated from the known. We are separated from our status quo. And there's this idea that like the life that's waiting for you. Most people have this undercurrent of an idea that there's something more in life, but they want to hold on to their current life. And the life that's waiting for you can't come until you let go of the one that you're currently living. And that is what the separation is about. Sometimes it's voluntary. Sometimes it's not voluntary. But the whole idea is you have your status quo. The very first stage of the story involves the protagonist, who will eventually become the hero, being separated from their status quo.
Is that like just some sort of like revelation? Maybe it's like, okay, well, maybe there's something out there beyond that fence that's worth going to explore, or like something like that. How does that manifest?
It could be everything from, like in Aesop's fables or in some of the old tales. It could be like you're throwing like a Princess and the Frog. Princess is playing with a ball. The ball drops into a well, mm-hmm. and then that's how this whole journey starts. Or it could be in Knights and King Arthur, it could be Parsifal sort of being in his little village, being introduced to a knight, and then the knights get this idea of knighthood into him, and then his separation is saying goodbye to his mom, crossing a bridge, and then going to become a knight. Or it could be could it be Nemo swimming out to touch the boat?
100%. I don't know why when you're talking, I'm like, that's what I thought about.
No, 100% it could be that. It could be me moving to Austin 3 years ago.
Yeah, or like that's what I was going to ask, like a practical, in today's world, like a breakup, or like losing your job 100%. Or starting a business or anything.
Or taking a different route home. Like that's how it starts. It's anything that separates you from your routine, that introduces...
From your known, yeah.
Exactly, that introduces the unknown and uncertain. Like that's where the opportunity is. That's the idea of like you enter the forest where it's darkest, because that to get the treasure you're looking for is where you least want to look. It's that whole idea is we've everything in our known world, we have the treasure in that world. And so if we want to continue expanding, want to continue growing, it's out there.
Yeah.
It's in the places you haven't explored yet.
Yeah. And so that separation leads you to descent, which is, I'm guessing that's just like descent into the unknown, into the abyss.
Yeah, so this
void.
is commonly illustrated, obviously, in in the story of Jonah when he goes into the belly of the whale. Mm-hmm. Just darkness in general. Gilgamesh, in the story of Gilgamesh, he goes into this like really dark valley for a long time. Psychologically, we can think about it as Exodus is actually a great image of this also. So when the Israelites are leaving Egypt,
The tyranny.
yeah. So they leave Egypt. That's a separation of sorts. Mm. And then what they do is they go into the wilderness. They go into the desert. They go into this place of depravity where it's hard. It's difficult. They don't want to be. And so most of them are like, hey, Moses, why'd you lead us out here? We actually want to go back to Egypt and be slaves because this sucks.
Well, because we knew, we at least knew what was going to happen.
Exactly. Here in the unknown, you're telling us we're going to reach the promised land. Who are we to believe you? All of these things. That's what the descent is after every separation, there's a period of uncertainty where the temptation is to go back because it's uncomfortable. And so that's the period you have to get through. And at every stage, especially these first two stages, are what I call threshold guardians. So as before you pass into that stage, there's something like a threshold guardian, some test, whether it's like the initial opportunity to turn back, or the initial obstacle that seems insurmountable, or maybe it's like a river to cross. That's how it's represented. Doesn't matter what it is. It's the first big blow, the first big punch that comes. Threshold guardian its job is to test your commitment to the cause and the journey, and it comes at these transition points. So that's what, and it's only after that you can sort of enter into the ascent. But that's the biggest thing to know on your own personal journey as you step into these things and try to go somewhere. You're going to face these forces. That's the whole reason I talk about the hero's journey in general, is to try to bring to attention the forces that you'll face so that you know that are normal and that you just have to keep sort of pressing on and how to progress through this hero's journey, because it's always an option. It's not always like this. Sometimes it's like chutes and ladders. You can toggle yourself back. You send yourself back to the beginning every time you start over.
And that's what temptation is like the toggle back.
100%.
There's this, before we'll go into initiation after this, but on the topic of temptation, let's see who this is from.
So on this topic, like just before I forget.
Yeah.
Joseph Campbell has a line that basically says, when you start to give way to temptation or you act with cowardice, then you enter something like the anti-way, and you no longer become a hero that saves. You become somebody that needs saving.
You become the burden.
Exactly.
Interesting. This is I absolutely love this depiction. This is from Ralph Waldo Emerson in Compensation, on the topic of temptations. Every evil to which we do not succumb is a benefactor. We gain the strength of the temptation we resist.
Yeah, it's this idea of like, I can't remember in like anime or what it was from, but there was a sword that absorbed the power of everybody it slayed. It's the same thing with temptation.
I want to read that again.
Yeah.
Every evil to which we do not succumb is a benefactor. We gain the strength of the temptation we resist. Man, that's freaking powerful.
I think it's in that same section. St. Augustine has a line about every vice we overcome becomes a ladder, which is the same thing. But yeah, I agree. That was one of the ideas in this second book that fundamentally changed the way I think about temptation and sort of steel myself. And there's always that testing point. That's one of the reasons I also love myth. I talk about that in the beginning of the book. Of one of the values I think is preparation for the testing point. In reading these stories, we are allowed to give ourselves a sort of trial run in terms of how to act when we face those things in our own life. That's the preparation for the testing point. And so reading these stories has made it now come into my consciousness when I face those testing points and temptations. My mind instantly can come back to these ideas and say, no. Every evil resisted is a power absorbed.
Yep.
Like, that's simple.
I was having this conversation with someone recently. because like I mentioned, I love stories. I love historical fiction. I'm reading War and Peace right now. My other favorite novel. I'm almost done. Count of Monte Cristo, Musashi. All my favorite books that I've ever read were stories. And somebody asked me why that is, and I said this after like thinking about it for a while. I am a part of the story, not apart from it.
Yeah.
And I think that speaks to exactly what you're talking about. The idea that at least what I do, is I like inject myself in it, because then I'm like, okay, well, what would I do in Prince Andre's shoes right here?
Yeah.
What would I do here? And it gives you like a little test.
Yeah.
And if I'm honest with myself, sometimes I'm like, well, maybe I wouldn't have done that, or would I be courageous enough to make this decision? Or I just love that idea of like injecting ourselves in the story. As you mentioned, like our imagination is very powerful. We can sort of prepare ourselves.
Well, and like it or not, we are a part of the story. Like we are the inheritors of these stories, and also the DNA of everybody that came before us. Mm-hmm. So we are in the story, whether we want to be in the story or not. The only question is, what is our contribution? This is Walt Whitman's, like, that you may contribute a verse. And so that's the only way to see the world. Otherwise, we see the world as something acting on us, not something we act in and can influence. So that comes back to like the idea of agency in general.
Life happens for us, not to us.
Yeah,
idea.
exactly.
So
exactly.
You move from descent into initiation. What happens there? What's the catalyst for that change?
Yeah, so like at the bottom, so you pass through sort of the bottom, which is the lowest low, and then in the initiation phase, this is when you get to. You go back to the story of Jonah. He has the realization that he needs to change, and that he's repenting for turning from God. And so then the initiation is where you affirm your decision to continue the hero's journey. There's like obviously still some struggles and some things that come in that part of the journey, but in general, this is you are starting to change. You have started sort of you have recognized at this point what needs to change, and you're in the beginning process of making that change manifest in your life, improving yourself, capable of taking this treasure back to home.
Of the return, which is the next one, because then you get separated, you go into the unknown, you descend into the unknown, you're faced with temptation, you reaffirm, you get initiated, and then with that knowledge of the 100 yards outside of that farmer's fence, you can return back to the farm with the knowledge that you've gained, and now the unknown is less and the known is more. Yeah,
exactly. That's right. And it's like the whole, like going back to this idea of like the idea of a hero evolving over time to now, once you get to like St. George, or even like King Arthur, there's this idea that it's not, Odysseus is like, the benefits he brings back are largely for himself.
Mm-hmm.
But it sort of expands into this idea that what you bring back benefits the entire village. And so it's this gold that's brought back that's shared with everybody. Or in the farm, you could say it's new land given to everybody, for like the entire village, for instance. This is also why you often see the motif of, like when a king gets sick, the land goes to waste. The crops stop producing food.
Mm-hmm.
The soil goes bad, the trees go bad, things wither, plague happens, whatever. So there's always that's and then the hero goes on this journey to find out what is causing this thing, and then when they come back, all that stuff comes back to life.
Yeah.
And so it's like
it'll revitalize it.
Exactly. And this is where like one of my favorite revelations or just like conclusions I came to in writing the book of, there's all this lore around the Holy Grail and being this chalice that brings sort of eternal life, heals all wounds, is just the container of everything that Christ drank from at the Last Supper. And so there's all these legends about it. There's not really a good tale about like the grit. There is, but
there's Monty Python.
Yeah, true. But there's this idea, like once you really look at what the like medieval monks would write about these stories, like I talk about them in the book, is there's this idea that the hero makes himself into the Grail. by going on these journeys. Like he becomes the container of life. And so it's like the search for the quest and giving yourself to that highest quest, you become the grail that can then sort of revitalize where you left. And so it's like the grail is something you find internally. The reward is who you become in the process. You become the thing capable of bringing life to the land.
I like that idea of like of us, like you and me, and these characters. We become the thing we're after.
Yeah.
In a way, or like at least fulfilling that. Okay, I want to move to Hercules because, as I mentioned, I think before we recorded, I remember exactly where I was when I read this because I mean, you can tell literally the whole, like there's like 3 pages that are all underlined, but
Yes.
I watched Hercules when I was younger. I thought he was like this just super strong dude who saved some people or whatever. And the actual story of Hercules is crazy. I think he ends up in a fit of rage killing his family.
No, so he kills his art teacher.
Art teacher.
Yes, and his family. So the idea is the family one comes where Hera, so you have to understand that like the background here is Zeus was known for being a philanderer and cheating on his wife and sister. Weird.
Yeah.
But Hera. And Hercules is the child of one of these affairs. And so then in order to sort of like, as Hercules is coming of age, as punishment, she basically like tries to upset him becoming a demigod and like wants to ruin his life. And what she does is she throws a madness on him that causes him to confuse his family for enemies, and then he slaughters his family. And then as punishment for that, he's sent on these 12 labors.
Gotcha.
Because at that, I mean, obviously it's terrible, but in Greek society specifically, the worst crime you could commit was the killing of family.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So this happens. Does he meet Kakaya and Arete? That's the 2 names, right?
Yeah.
Before or after the 12 labors?
Well, so this is where, as with all myths, like the old myths especially, they don't come from any one source, and so you're kind of taking them from a few different sources. But in this context, it would come before because he comes to the crossroads, and this is in I think it's Xenophon's Memorabilia where the choice of Hercules is from. He comes to that crossroads when he's coming of age, so I think like 16, 17, 18.
Okay, so I'm gonna read. This is like 2 pages, so it's gonna take a little bit. But this is legitimately one of the most impactful sources of imagery that I've read. And
dude, I think about this every day.
It's incredible. So slowly, a few shapes become clear. 2 larger than life females are making their way to the mountain toward him, down the mountain toward him. One of them colors the air around her with nobility. Her movements are graceful and modest, her beauty natural. The other moves with swagger, and her complexion is painted with makeup. She casts her eyes frequently upon herself, then turns them on those that are present to see whether anyone regards her, and now and then looks on the figure she makes in her own shadow. As they draw near, the former continues the same composed pace, while the latter, striving to get in front of the other, runs to Hercules and introduces herself. "My dear Hercules," she says, smiling slightly, "I see you're torn on which way to go with your life. Be my friend and follow me, my love, and I will lead you into possession of pleasure. With me, you'll be out of the reach of pain, away from the noise and disturbances of peace and war. Every want and whim will be at your fingertips, comfortable beds, clouds of perfume, crowds of beauties, all ready to receive you." Hearing the first woman make her case, Hercules asks her name. "My friend," she responds, "call me Kakaya. Those who are jealous call me Vice." Having let Vice patiently make her invitation first, the other moves gracefully up to Hercules and addresses him in a much different manner. "Hercules," she begins, "my name is Arete. I come before you aware of your divine heritage and love of virtue. I know that the potential in you is calling to you, and my road is the way. But before I invite you to take my path, I must remind you of this established truth. Nothing truly valuable can be purchased without pain and labor. The gods have set a price on every real and noble pleasure. If you long to be honored by your country, you must take care to serve it. If you want your body to be strong, you must train your body to be the servant of your mind, forging it with toil and sweat. These, then, are my terms. Immortality at the cost of your comfort." Kakaya, eager to win back Hercules' heart, interjects, "You see, by her own admission, her way toward happiness is long and difficult. Mine is short and easy." Hercules' eyes shoot toward Arete, who calmly looks at Kakaya and responds, "You are right that my road is long and winding." And this is the most underlined part for me. It's like triple highlighted. "You are right that my road is long and winding with sharp rocks and steep ledges. Every step of the way will require a commitment to endure discomfort. But you are very wrong to place any happiness that you offer on equal ground with what I bring to the table. What, dear Kakaya, are the pleasures that you offer? To eat before you are hungry, drink before you are thirsty, sleep before you are tired, to gratify your appetites before they arise? Yet you would deny the most beautiful object, the work of one's own hands. Your followers all seem to have a similar affliction. They pass away their youth in a dream of mistaken pleasures, while they are hoarding up anguish, torment, and remorse for old age. As for me and my followers," Arete continues, "their fruits are thus. They rest easy in the future that receives them. Their slumbers are sound and their wakings are joyful, because they reap in future seasons what they sow today. The discipline and discomfort that weighs ounces today removes the regret that weighs tons later in life. Those that follow me are favored by the gods, beloved by their communities, esteemed by their countries, and after the close of their labors, honored by posterity."
That's it.
And
That's it.
For context, like the way that I see it, it's like he's literally sitting somewhere, there's like a hill, and these two ladies walk up to him, and he's got these two ways. That last sentence, beloved by their communities, esteemed by their countries, and after the close of their labors, honored by posterity. To me, what man doesn't wish those things? You know?
Yeah, dude.
What
That's
a powerful freaking, I don't know. I absolutely love that.
No, it's such a great story.
I want to get your take on it. What does it mean to you? What is it? What is the thought that come to your mind?
Yeah, dude. I mean, there's there's so many things happening in the story that make it so great. I mean, this is why John Adams wanted to use the image of the choice of Hercules
That's the next page.
as a seal for the United States. It's because he sort of envisioned it's kind of this, you see the meme, it's like, which way, Western man? Mm-hmm. It's the same thing. It's, again, this
the
is
crossroad. Yeah, that's true.
This is the idea of myth, and that's what a meme is. A meme is mimesis, and it's like a meme is effectively a little myth. That's what a meme is, and that's why the best ones capture something like the collective consciousness. When they go viral because they are hitting something that everybody recognizes. It's the same thing as myth, just on a really small scale. And this story of Hercules at a crossroads it's a different variation of also this idea that we meet the devil at the crossroads. Because anytime we face a choice in life, there's always a temptation to a path that offers something, promises something that it can't deliver. But it's always there. It's saying you could have this for less work. This will be easier. More people will like you. This will be more accepted. You won't have to face potential ostracization. Everything you've ever wanted is it's simple. Just like take the shortcut, the short path. Every decision that we make, that voice exists in us. And then there's also something in us that knows we shouldn't do that. That knows our spirit, like if we talk about like getting in the spirit in this sort of situation, it's like there's something that tugs us that says if you choose that, you're gonna regret it.
It's the wide path.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, this is also the whole idea of like you reap what you sow is also kind of is hidden in this choice. I mean, this is like the statement you hear all the time of like hard choices, easy life, easy choices, hard life. That's just a different way of saying you reap what you sow. So it's like if you're doing things that are difficult that you should do, and that sort of call to your spirit, then what you're doing is you're setting yourself up to receive sort of the blessedness later in life. This is the idea of compound interest. So the thing I love about this story is you can't talk about the story without talking about everything. Mm-hmm. It has like a remarkable way of capturing
every decision you make.
Yeah,
every one.
Yeah, exactly. And just like orienting your life toward virtue and understanding that vice will always be an energy alive in your life. You can never kill the snake with finality. It always is existing. It's always going to show up. It's always going to be there. And it's only when we think it's not there that we succumb to it. And so it's like there's this awareness of sort of the forces at work and the decisions we make. So that's what fundamentally, that's like what the story represents to me is just a constant reminder of I'm going to face choices today that ask me to choose between the easy path and the hard path. Do I want to be like Hercules and elevate to Olympus? There's this idea, there's also this like, there's no elevators to Olympus. I think in our current age, when we think about having everything instantly on demand, something in us wants to try to convince us that there's an elevator. There's a quick route to success, to everything we want, to, if I experiment and do this one thing, like then I'm to the moon. There's no elevator. It's long, it's steep, it's hard, it's difficult. And that's eternal. And so like that's why patience and persistence delivers the crown. That's why the diligent stand before kings, because it's the people that have the spirit to outlast the people that want to take the easy path are the ones who set themselves apart.
Powerful. It's I kind of want to go back and watch the cartoon version.
Dude,
it's just to see.
I cry every time I listen to Go the Distance.
Is that a song? That's a song, right?
Yeah. I'm not joking. And when I like hit a particular, I don't listen to music really when I work out anymore. But like if I have a track session and it's like particularly hard,
Hercules, bam.
I'm just like Go the Distance. I'm like crying and I'm running, just like
it makes it.
I will go the distance.
Dude, music's. C.S. Lewis talks about music too. I think a lot. I think he does actually.
Yeah, he does.
But you mentioned John Adams. This is the very next page, and this is also pretty.
Yeah.
Double highlighted thing for me. This is also cool. I'm obsessed with the Founders podcast right now. I don't know if you've ever listened to it.
Yeah.
I'm an evangelist for it right now. I think it's the best podcast I've ever listened to. And one thing that he talks about is these almost like myths in a way, that these things that across time, no matter the industry, no matter whether it's business, military leaders, politicians, whatever it is, these great men, these people that reach Olympus, you could say in a way, there's these threads that are pulled through all of their lives. And to hear John Adams literally quote or think of Hercules and write this, I'll read it real quick.
He's young when he writes this.
Yeah, what is he, like young 20s, right?
Yeah.
Something like that?
Yeah.
So also makes me think about what the hell I was doing when I was like 20. I mentioned that last night. I'm like, dude, I think I saw this thing where the founding fathers were like 18, 19, 20, 21, 22. I'm like, dude, I remember what I was doing when I was 19 and it wasn't founding a country. But nonetheless, John Adams writes, I believe this is in his journal, 24 years old.
Yeah.
The other night, the choice of Hercules came into my mind and left impressions there which I hope will never be effaced, nor long unheeded. I thought of writing a fable on the same plan, but accommodated by omitting some circumstances and inserting others to my own case. Let virtue address me. Which, dear youth, will you prefer? Life of effeminacy, indolence, and obscurity, or a life of industry, temperance, and honor? Take my advice, rise and mount your horse by the morning's dawn, and shake away amidst the great and beautiful scenes of nature that appear at the time of day, all the crudities that are left in your stomach, and all the obstructions that are left in your brains. Then return to your study, and bend your whole soul to the institutes of the law, and the reports of cases that have been adjudged by the rules and the institutes. Let no trifling diversion or amusement or company decoy you from your books, i.e. let no girl, no gun, no cards, no flutes, no violins, no dress, no tobacco, no laziness decoy you from your books. It's pretty, the first half of that is incredible to me. Let virtue address me. I think of like, it's literally Hercules, just like virtue, which arete means virtue, correct?
Yeah,
okay.
Arete means excellence.
Okay.
It's the Greek word for excellence.
Gotcha.
Another reason to read Aristotle. That's like in Nicomachean Ethics. It's his whole point is like arete, getting good at a craft, becoming excellent at something is what causes the flourishing of the human spirit. And so like excellence is the highest virtue. One of the highest virtues. I mean, thinking more every time I think about this story, I freaking love this story. I think if there was one, I think I'm gonna write a kid's book on this story, kind of like cool. How he talks about it. He's like, I thought about writing a fable.
Yeah, that'd be cool.
Says. But when I think about it in terms of if and when, God willing, I have kids, I want this story to be in their consciousness. I want them to sort of carry. There's one of my favorite lines from Seneca is this idea that nothing except the soul is worthy of wonder, and especially as life starts to deliver more and more of what I call second things that are sought for some other reason, whether it's anything material, anything tangible, anything fleshly that speaks to the flesh. As the world gives us more and more access to those second things, and we can have as much as we want, first things for their own sake, goods in and of themselves, are going to become increasingly important to the human spirit if we are to preserve it and for it to flourish. So if I could have a story animate my children, this is going to be top of the list in terms of like to keep virtue always in your mind.
Yeah.
To keep her voice always dominant.
It's also just simple for a kid to remember, you know, like that could be like totally symbolic and carry out through.
Exactly.
I'm going to look up a quote by Abraham Lincoln that I've often quoted as well, because I find it to be pretty fascinating.
I don't know if do you know that? I talk about it in a little
at the beginning.
Book. Lincoln's one of my favorite figures.
Yeah, I remember you.
He's probably.
You want the Lincoln moment? I think I remember reading or something.
Yeah. I love. He's certainly on my writing, probably the most influential in terms of how I wanted to write. There's a book called Lincoln's Sword, one of my favorite books of all time, by this guy named Douglas Wilson, and he breaks down Lincoln's writing process when he was writing all these speeches, and how what Lincoln did is he wrote by ear. And so it's like the idea of like, you know, the rules of grammar so you can break them. Mm-hmm. And so when he's writing, it's like also all anybody's doing when they're reading, because he had to give them for speeches.
Yeah.
So everything he wrote was thinking about it auditorily. But then if you really think about it, what does somebody do when they read? They hear it in their head.
They're like speaking to themselves.
Exactly. And so you have to think about it, and you have to think about writing in general in terms of like, how does it sound? Is it easy to the ears? Is it pleasant to the ears? And like managing the reader's willpower in terms of like, you can only give them so much, too many pauses, too many long sentences. They lose everything is about willpower and energy management. So like learning to sort of think about writing that way, and the way he uses alliteration is also remarkable. He talks about like the mystic chords of memory and the better angels of our nature. He's just got this poetic nature about him that not very many people have had in history. And that's what made him so effective. This whole premise of this book, The Lincoln Sword, is about how Lincoln effectively won the Civil War with his words, with his ability to persuade through the written word. And like, that's what's remarkable. You mix that with this humble spirit of a guy just making the case, like saying things like, insofar as God gives me the ability to see the right.
Who says that?
Who says that? Like, what president today would ever say that?
Yeah.
There's a lack of humility that is like really highlighted when you look at a figure like Lincoln. Yeah,
that's fascinating to dive into him. And I think this quote's pretty, it's an interesting quote, but I also want to say the idea that you said persuasion via the written word. Persuasion, in my opinion, there's a lot that you could basically just say advertising. Like and I'm going somewhere with this. It's basically advertising. And one of the kings of advertising, David Ogilvy. Have you ever read any of his books?
No.
Have you heard of him?
No.
He's a fascinating guy, incredible writer. Heard about him on Founders Podcast. But one of his things was just what you're saying about writing and advertising. Like this, don't use insanely long sentences. Don't overcomplicate things. List the facts. Be direct. Be simple. Use analogies that are simply understood.
Yeah.
And I just think it's fascinating that one of the best, if not the best advertiser of all time, did that. Here we are talking about him. Lincoln did the same, and he convinced the country to stay on a particular track. The quote by Lincoln that I'm mentioning, I've referenced this all the time, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this. It has been my experience. Hold up. Abraham Lincoln said, "It has been my experience that people who have no vices have very few virtues." What does that mean? How do you rectify that?
Yeah, so there's a couple of different ways to read this. One way is my sense is he is saying it just knowing what I know about his personality, obviously not being there, but like having studied his life, taking class on him. I think he's probably referencing the fact that the people that tell you they have no vices have no virtues. But I also think there's a way of reading it in the context of Jung has this quote about no tree can reach to heaven unless its roots reach to hell. So there is this idea that the most virtuous person is the person who's overcome the most vice. You can think about this in the context of, we'll just use an example of like lust, for instance. And this is a weird example, but it works, and it's hard to grapple with. It's kind of uncomfortable. It makes it uncomfortable. Who has more virtue? The man with many options who resists the temptation to be with women, or the man who has none? And so it's like there is this element of the weight of the vice overcome determines the height of the virtue.
Back to the temptation thing. It's if you have no temptations to overcome, then you can't draw the strength from those 100%. Temptations that you overcome. 100%. That's a fascinating. I've never really thought about it. I've thought about it from the perspective of more or less like what you said, the first explanation, where it's like if you say that you have no vices, you're probably not a very virtuous person, because everyone has vices, and it's a denial of the shadow.
Mm-hmm. It's an inability to recognize your own. That's like the same type. That type of recognition would be somebody that would say, "There's no way I would act as a Gestapo in Nazi Germany if I was in those shoes." But then the problem is, then in acting as if that isn't possible, they become the people committing those things because they don't think that they would ever do that.
They don't see themselves become the monster. Yeah,
interesting. There's nothing.
Well, so here's the thing. It's like what you just said. The person who defeats monsters must watch to not become a monster. If you don't defeat monsters, then how can you see yourself becoming? I don't know. But the other thing that just came to mind was I think it's Peterson who talks about like the idea of like turning your cheek, like turning your cheek when you get slapped. I think it's
also biblical idea,
biblical principle. I think he's deriving it from that. But he talks about like there's no virtue if I can't do anything to you. If somebody hits me and I have zero power, then there's no virtue in me not doing anything. That's just me being incapable and not competent. But if I can, in fact, use my sword, unsheath my sword, as he would say it. He said, "The meek will inherit the world," which I think is somewhere in the New Testament. His definition of meek is not the inherit the earth is not. His definition of meek is somebody who has a sword that is sheathed and is capable of wielding it, but keeps it sheathed. Not someone who doesn't have a sword in the first place. So it's sort of the same example.
I agree, and I think it's not that it isn't virtuous at all. It's like one of the other things. Speaking of golden mean, as a mental model that can be used across so many things. It's also this idea of very rarely are things yes and no. There's degrees. And so it's like I would say there is still virtue in that person not hitting back, but it's not apples to apples. Mm-hmm. So like not all virtues are equal among people. Literally, you and I could do the same thing, and there's going to be different levels of virtue that are known only to the eternal, because it's contingent on my personal experiences, what I struggle with, my vices, my temptations. And so the same act can have different levels of virtue. And that's where we do have to be patient with people. It's because we never know we don't have all of the context of their life. They could do something that looks to us like a given, looks to us like, oh, that's to be expected. It could be an example of them overcoming a massive vice. In that case, there is a lot of virtue we don't see in that person. So to a certain extent, this is where it gets into this idea of like a personal relationship with the divine, with God, with Jesus, and this idea that like we're only answerable to that spirit because only that spirit has all of the context. And that goes back to this idea of like immovably centered and just resting satisfied with yourself.
Only that spirit can know our heart. Like there's no way I can know your heart. That's an interesting example because when I think about it, I think about something that maybe is easy for me. And this is like, I'm sure we all have examples, but you see somebody do something and it's like, well, how could they do that? That's just dumb. But for them, they might have no awareness of it. Or on the flip side, somebody could muster up an immense amount of courage to do something that to us seems extremely easy, but we don't know the fact that they defeated a massive monster in their life.
Yeah.
That's a really interesting way of putting it. I've never really thought
or
about it.
like
It's a qualitative thing too, like you said. It's not quantitative.
Exactly. It's like, or it could be something where it's like something we view as a common courtesy, a given, something that all people should do, and we see somebody that doesn't do it, and then we're immediately like, oh, they're a terrible person. Maybe, or maybe we don't have the context. Maybe we don't know how they were raised in this pattern, and we don't know the strength of the habit that caused them and conspired to get them to not see that as a common courtesy. So then when they do it, it looks to us like an everyday ordinary action, but it's actually a massive win for them. So it's like we have to be careful about, this is where the idea of like, planks and dust in your eye comes into play.
Yeah, I don't see it as it is. I see it as I see it.
Exactly.
Type deal. Fascinating. Okay, so let's see which one's next. Job.
Love Job.
Yeah, Job is fascinating. I haven't read the book in the Old Testament of Job. I want to very badly because I think he's probably one of the most fascinating characters to me.
Not only characters, but story.
Yes, just story overall.
And the inclusion of Job in the Bible is unique in that it's the only example I can think of where the critique of the book itself is included in the book.
Yeah.
Like the best argument against the existence of God is in the book that talks about the existence of God.
Mm-hmm.
Which is also, if you're talking about Lincoln and advocacy, going back to that idea, it's also probably the best strategy for proving the legitimacy of your idea. If you can entertain the best critique and sort of come out the other side and still have people convinced, then you've taken the ammo away from the enemy.
A quote an idea that you shared with me on our first podcast together was wisdom. I don't know who said this, but wisdom is the ability to entertain a thought without adopting it. Something to that effect. Yeah. It's the same type deal, I guess. But in the section on Job, you start with James 5:11. As you know, we count as blessed those who have persevered, which reminds me of, I think it's Romans 5:8, where it talks about we rejoice in our suffering because suffering produces perseverance, character, hope. And I think it's like we shall not be forsaken by hope or something like that, which I love that verse. But Job, for those that don't know, do you want to give like a quick little
so a quick summary
TLDR?
Of Job. Yeah.
Tough life.
Yeah, a quick summary of Job. Yeah, tough life. That's the TLDR. So it starts out with this really interesting, I'll be short, but I just think this is interesting. It starts out with this interesting sort of the Satan, which we would call it Satan, just means accuser. The accuser comes to sort of this heavenly council, and basically God is praising Job at the time, saying, look at Job, what a great servant. And then the accuser, Satan, comes and he says, well, that's because you've given him everything. You've blessed him. I bet if you took everything away, he wouldn't be singing your praises. God, for reasons unknown, entertains this and says, go ahead, do whatever you want, just don't kill him. And so Satan then proceeds this series of he takes away he was a rich guy, he took away his flock, he took away his kids, and then eventually ends up like ruining his marriage. But basically just takes everything that Job had away from him, sort of step by step. And the whole time along the way, Job's got these friends, and his friends are coming to him and be like, Job, you must have done something wrong to earn this wrath. You must have done something. His wife comes to him and says, clearly you did something.
Doesn't she say curse God and die or something?
Yeah, curse God and die is what she says. And so it's like the person that's supposed to be his biggest supporter also turns against him. So he loses literally everything. But still in all of that, he refuses to curse God. Now he questions God. He asks God why he's doing this, but he never curses him. He never denounces him. Again, he's immovably centered. He's comfortable. He's answerable to the divine. And then we come to the end of it, and God is basically calls God to account for all. Job calls God to account for all of these things. God finally shows up, and instead of answering Job, he just shows him the universe. And in showing him the universe, he's showing Job his limited perspective, his finite perspective. It's like the verse in Romans about he works all things together for good. How would we know? We don't have the context. We only live our limited life with our limited perspective. We don't know the chain reaction of all things. Even the wise cannot see all ends is what the title of that section. It's the story of the Chinese farmer I also tell in this section, where, which is again, going back to this idea of the Tao being a principle that is eternal, that sort of lays throughout different things. Quick summary of the Chinese farmer. A guy loses his horse. People come, villagers come and say, oh, what bad luck. And he says, maybe. And then that horse brings back a whole herd of horses. People are like, what good luck? He's like, maybe. Then his son breaks his leg trying to break the horses. People say, what bad luck? He says, maybe. And then the army drafts everybody, but not his son, because his son broke his leg. He says, oh, well, good luck. He says, maybe. You get the point. Mm-hmm. Even the wise cannot see all ends. In the moment, when we think something is good or bad, we don't have enough information to make that judgment. It's also the same thing with worry. Something I remind myself very often. We don't know enough to worry. How much of our worry should actually be excitement for what's to come? How much of our fear should actually be excitement for what is to come? So much of our emotions are based off our limited information, where in retrospect, we look back and be like, that was the wrong emotion at that time, given how things played out. How much more, if we experience that in the context of our small lives, how much more over the course of eternity? How ill-equipped are we to make judgments like that?
There's an idea. I wrote about this a while ago. The idea that you can't understand what you're in. And I used a picture of a maze, because if I'm looking at a maze, even if I escape it, even if I figure out how to mosey my way through, when I'm in the maze and I'm looking at 20-foot tall hedges, exactly. I have no idea what is going on.
Great image.
I have no idea. It was so simple when I thought of it, like, okay, that makes a lot of sense. And I think it relates pretty clearly to this.
That's right.
We can't understand what we're in.
We don't have the perspective.
Yeah, exactly. So it's interesting that God shows Job and he's like, hey, look, all those worries and stuff that you're like, all the things that are happening. It's like you had no idea what was going on.
Yeah.
Good little reminder.
No clue.
Yeah.
My favorite verse in Job is for when he has tested me, I shall come forth as gold. I think about that almost every day.
That reminds me, I think it's somewhere in here of the idea. What is it? The furnace. Oh, it's a verse as well. The furnace for gold, the crucible for silver, but God tests the heart or something like that.
Yeah. And then Seneca has fire's the test of gold, adversity of strong men. Same principle. So good.
Forged by fire. I love it.
Yeah.
This one, I think we're on David now, who's a pretty fascinating character or guy. Story as well. One thing I'll just say about the book real quick, because I will encourage, if anybody's listening to this point and you're not compelled to read the book, then not going to make it, I guess. I don't know. I mean, because it's like a no-brainer to me. It's literally incredible. It's like every single story we've heard of with more context and then the threads that get pulled through. But you go through, basically, I think you start with Gilgamesh, like all the heroes' journeys, the main myths and heroes' journeys. Gilgamesh, then the Greeks, then the Romans, then the Judeo-Christian, then the knights and stuff like that. Yeah, so basically now we're in Job, obviously biblical character. David, obviously biblical character. I highlighted this. I'm not even sure why I highlighted this in red, but I'm going to read it. He reminds us that we do not need to know precisely how or when fate will come calling. Our only task is to show up where we are summoned and be the best steward we can be over the sheep we are given in the pastures we find ourselves. Because faithfulness in the pastures comes before the palace. It is devotion to the ordinary that makes one extraordinary, and all of life is an opportunity to prepare for your moment when they come. Your moments when they come. Don't let fate find you unprepared. Why does David remind us of that?
Yeah, so it goes back to kind of the beginning when David is originally anointed by Samuel, and this is I love this part of the story. One thing to know about David is he was a shepherd. That was also true of many of the biblical patriarchs, not just the biblical patriarchs, but the classical ones too. So Hesiod, Works and Days, tells the origin of, like, in Greek mythology, he was also a shepherd. And so there's something in the classical world about the shepherds being uniquely equipped and prepared for leadership. And it makes sense when you think about it, right? Because those shepherds, what they had to do is they were protecting all these sheep against wolves, lions, beasts, whatever. And so when Samuel originally comes and is trying to figure out who's anointed, he looks at all of David's brothers and he's like, not that guy, not that guy. He's like, do you have any more sons? And he goes, actually, there's one still in the field. And he calls David in, and he's the one that's anointed. What first thing we learn about him? He's working. Mm-hmm. He's busy working. He's still doing his job. That's what he cares about.
He's doing the ordinary.
Exactly. He's doing the ordinary, this faithfulness. And so that's like one of the first. And then after he's anointed, he's kind of like, he sort of pass out the story, and then he comes back in the context of David and Goliath. But what we find out is everything he did as a shepherd leading up to that moment, small boy, you look at him, nobody would say you could defeat a giant. But in defending his sheep and all of the multiple times, endless days and nights of walking these sheep through treacherous terrain, defending them with his sling against animals 2-3 times bigger than him, he honed his ability. And so there's this his faithfulness in the pasture, his ability as a shepherd to protect his flock, gave him the confidence to face Goliath. And so there is this that why he reminds us of the we can't part of it is we don't know what our current lives are preparing us for. And there's this idea of if you're trusted with little, you eventually be trusted with much. If we have to prove to ourselves that we can become excellent at whatever it is that we're doing right now, because we don't know what it's preparing us for. There's the quote about, you want to read the Churchill quote that's right before it on the page before?
I love how you remember that. That's right.
I think it's right here.
Okay, here we go. You can tell you wrote the book. That's pretty funny. Yeah. Right here? Yeah. Okay, there's a quote often attributed to Winston Churchill that drives the point home. Funny note on that is isn't there some meme about how, or some joke about how all these quotes are attributed to Churchill? Yeah,
so the thing about this is there's not a record of him saying this exact thing, but they're close.
Yeah. Okay, so there is a quote often attributed to Winston Churchill that drives the point home. To every man there comes in his lifetime that special moment when he is figuratively tapped on the shoulder and offered a chance to do a very special thing, unique to him and fitted to his talents. What a tragedy if that moment finds him unprepared or disqualified for that which would be his finest hour.
Yeah, so it's the idea that it is our faith and our perseverance and our devotion and commitment to the pastures we're placed in that qualifies us. Not only that qualifies us, that makes sure that we are David when given the opportunity to slay Goliath. If David had put in those hours in the pasture, there's an open question of, would he have been prepared?
Yeah, there's so many parallels between that, but you think about Michael Jordan or a Tom Brady and all these people who are just so meticulous and almost psychopathic with their obsession with the details and the small things and the ordinary and all that stuff that gives them the ability. I love the imagery too, that one sentence. Because faithfulness in the pastures comes before the palace. That reminds me of the verse in Proverbs, an inheritance easily gained will not be blessed in the end.
Yeah.
If you're not faithful in the pasture and you somehow get placed in the palace, you're not going to live up to that finest hour at that moment.
And this hyperlinks back to the choice of Hercules and this idea of you reap what you sow. Mm-hmm. And there's this idea that I don't know, at one point, this is one of those quotes that I read at one point. I'm I have no idea where it was from. But it's basically this idea that given his nature, success was inevitable. When you can look at somebody say, given their nature, success is inevitable. It's because when they operate in that sort of way, where it's just day in, day out, devotion, commitment, perseverance, diligence, their elevation becomes inevitable. Their ability to outlast, because everything's a war of attrition. Mm-hmm. People that want the easy way are going to fall off the path. And the one that can stay committed eventually finds himself among increasingly fewer and fewer people. So it becomes inevitable that he will stand out. His success becomes inevitable. If you follow the way of virtue, it becomes inevitable. So there was, even though I don't even know who said it, but I often hear a voice in my head and be given his nature, success was inevitable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that reminds me of Proverbs 13:21, where Solomon says, because righteous can probably be, righteousness and virtue are similar.
Yeah, righteous is the antonym of wickedness. So
okay, so they're similar, same vein. Would I be correct in saying that? Yeah, so that's right. He says that the righteous are rewarded with good. It's pretty much, it's just 100%. A fact. It's a law of the universe.
Yeah, so across time, this is the thing. So this is the message of Job, because Job is the exception to the rule that the righteous are rewarded, right? And that's why it's so powerful. But the whole point of Proverbs is this is the general rule. And then Job says there are exceptions, but if you stick to the way, eventually you'll revert to the mean. Job's wealth is doubled in the end. So there is this idea of as long as you stay devoted to the path, eventually you'll come back here. But that doesn't mean you're not going to face these hard times, these tough situations.
Have you heard of a chiasm?
No.
Nick Smith introduced me to this idea. It's like the idea that, I'm going to totally butcher this, but like A, B, B, A. It's things that invert. It's like a lesson or an idea that inverts. You can think of it as like a bell curve, I think would be a good way. I don't know if that's accurate, but that's the point. It's like, okay, here's the rule, which is that the righteous are rewarded with good. Oh, but actually that's not true. But then in the end, it actually inverts and it's true again.
Yeah, so like B is a deviation from A. Everything will always come back to A, and there will be deviations from it.
Yeah, I love that. Okay, I think we got time for a couple more. That's David. One thing I'll say about this, the Tolkien. I think this is it. Yeah, I think he's going on a walk. J.R.R. Tolkien was like good buddies with C.S. Lewis.
Yeah.
Lewis was an atheist, as you mentioned, staunch atheist. Tolkien was not.
Yeah, he's a Catholic.
And
Tolkien was a Catholic.
They would often go on these long walks, which I think is all fascinating.
Yeah, it's also, I mean, that was part of so they had a writing group known as the Inklings.
Can you imagine sitting in on those meetings?
No. I mean, I often do imagine it, to be honest. So I can't imagine it, but I can imagine it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But yeah, are you going to read a quote?
Yeah, I'm going to read this, I believe.
It's from Surprised by Joy, or what is it?
Let's see. Where is this from? I'm not sure. Let's see. C.S. Lewis, Myth Became Fact in Norse Mythology. And I think it's that, if I'm not mistaken. But it starts... Actually...
All good. Doesn't matter.
Yeah, it doesn't really matter. But I believe the context is that Tolkien is talking right now. I could be mistaken. Maybe it's Lewis. We'll find out.
Yeah, I think it's from Myth Became Fact, because it's when he's talking about when it clicked for him that Christ was myth became fact.
So he says, now as myth transcends thought, incarnation transcends myth. The heart of Christianity is a myth, which is also a fact. The old myth of the dying God, without ceasing to be myth, comes down from the heaven of legend and imagination to the earth of history. It happens. At a particular date, in a particular place, followed by definable historical consequences, we pass from a Balder, or an Osiris, dying nobody knows when or where, to a historical person crucified. It is all in order, under Pontius Pilate. By becoming fact, it does not cease to be myth. That is the miracle. I suspect that men have sometimes derived more spiritual sustenance from myths they did not believe than from the religion they professed. To be truly Christian, we must both assent to the historical fact and also receive the myth, fact though it has become, with the same imaginative embrace that we accord to all myths. The one is hardly more necessary than the other. Those who do not know that this great myth became fact when the Virgin conceived are indeed to be pitied. But Christians also need to be reminded that what became fact was a myth, that it carries with it into the world of fact all the properties of a myth. God is more than a god, not less. Christ is more than a Balder, not less. We must not be ashamed of the mythical radiance resting on our theology. We must not be nervous about parallels in pagan Christ. They ought to be there. It would be a stumbling block if they weren't. We must not, in false spirituality, withhold our imaginative welcome. If God chooses to be mythopoeic, and is not the sky itself a myth, shall we refuse to be mythopathic? For this is the marriage of heaven and earth, perfect myth and perfect fact, claiming not only our love and our obedience, but also our wonder and delight, addressed to the savage, the child, and the poet in each one of us, no less than to the mortalist, the scholar, and the philosopher. He's a pretty good writer.
He's a great writer.
That's incredible.
It is incredible. I can't improve on anything he said. I'll just add a little bit of context and sort of a way to think about it. So part of what he's saying here, we talked about it earlier, is you could see all of these heroes as little Christs. As you know, you could see Christ as the King of Kings, or like the collection. The point, all heroes lead to Christ, you could say. And so he's the aggregation, the pulling up of all virtue into a single figure. And if we think about this in the context, going back to the idea of a Tao, or having this eternal principle that seems to pervade the universe. We can call it God, for instance, and that everybody that seems to land in cultures and different religions, but paints a pretty overlapping picture in a lot of ways if we really sort of like do the work. Then we have this image of something that does exist outside of time that everybody has access to. So what he's saying here, and saying that effectively these other figures in Greek myth specifically is what he's talking about, or Egyptian, he's saying they're intimations or foreshadowings of Christ. They are incomplete versions of Christ. So they are the thing dimly seen. So they're not inconsistent with Christ. The same virtues that they have are just all embodied in the capital V virtue of virtues, which makes sense when we think about it in the context of, if Christ comes down, what is Christ? But the Word made flesh. The Word is the Holy Spirit, the thing that pervades all things.
Logos, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And so there is a universality element to Christ. So it would make sense, if he's universal, that his fragments would be everywhere. Intimations and shadows of him would be in these figures all across time and history. He is just that intimation made flesh in a particular time and point in history.
This was perhaps one of the most, what would you say? One of the parts of this book that stuck out the most to me and actually impacted me the most, because just like we were talking about earlier, the idea, this is probably one of the origins of that idea where like paradox is truth. That to a reasoning mind, that doesn't add up.
Yeah.
He was myth and fact. He was God in flesh. That doesn't make sense. But I also love that C.S. Lewis was saying, just because there were other myths doesn't make, it's not the dispelling of those myths as false that makes Jesus' life fact. It's actually like, they should be there. They are there. They're there for a reason.
Yeah.
It's
well,
just
that's what I mean, because if they weren't, then that would defeat the universality of him.
Mm-hmm.
But the fact that they had sort of a preview and they could sense that there was something that, if anything, that proves, it certainly doesn't defeat, but it helps support this idea that he is the Word made flesh, the eternal pervading world, the eternity set on every human heart, made manifest.
The Holy Spirit. Yeah, it's fascinating. I'm looking for one more part. I think there's
what part? I might be able to tell you.
I want to say it's like a poem or something. It's either at the beginning or the end. I could be mistaken.
Not a poem. Do you remember what it's about?
I want to say it's like about the light or something. I remember mentioning it on our first podcast, but maybe I'm wrong. We'll find out.
All good. Are you talking about
Oh, here it is. I found it. Here we go.
Yeah,
this is the last
Tempest Tossed Souls.
Yeah,
that one.
So
James Allen.
Yeah, so James Allen, As a Man Thinketh.
Yeah.
This is how you finish the book. Last page.
I love this quote.
Tempest tossed souls, wherever ye may be, under whatsoever conditions ye may live, know this: in the ocean of life the isles of blessedness are smiling, and the sunny shore of your ideal awaits your coming. Keep your hand firmly upon the helm of thought. In the bark of your soul reclines the commanding master. He does but sleep. Wake him. Self-control is strength. Right thought is mastery. Calmness is power. Say unto your heart, peace, be still. What does that mean to you?
There's earlier in that book, he says, as the oak sleeps in the acorn, a waking angel stirs inside you. If I could rewrite it, I would write something as this idea that as the oak sleeps in the acorn, a king sleeps inside you, if I'm speaking to a man. And there's this idea, Meister Eckhart had this idea of the birth of the soul in every human heart. We are the recipients of this divine seed that only grows if we cultivate it. And so what I see him talking about here is we sort of hold this image of the ideal in us, and we make ourselves in that image as we cultivate it, as we water it, as we act with virtue. There's an expansion, there's a birth of the soul in our heart that makes us more in the mold of the divine.
I believe this is Pascal, but the quote that just came to my mind is, I am not the ocean, that I am not a drop in the ocean, but the ocean in a drop.
Yeah, that's perfect.
Is that,
I don't know if it's Pascal or not.
Either way, but that reminds me of like the oak tree and an acorn.
That's it. That's
it's fascinating.
Yeah.
last question. I wasn't planning on asking this, but like, how does this practically, how does this apply, or like what's the meta lesson, do you think? That might be difficult to do, but like what's the meta lesson for myself, for you, for young men to derive from these stories, from these myths and these heroes and these heroes' journeys? What's the meta lesson for us?
I mean, I would say like the lesson to take away from this is, we mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, if the vitalized revitalizes. So there's always something in the world. Entropy, or the idea of chaos and things disintegrating, is a fundamental principle. Things are always falling apart, which means they always have to be put back together. And the people that put them together are the heroes. So the people that are willing to sort of go out into the unknown. And what to take away from this book specifically, as you read it, I think it's important that you highlight and call attention to and sit with the things that speak to you. Forget my voice in this book. I tried as much as possible to tell these stories in a way that were true to the stories. And then I have my reflections if you want to hear my thoughts on the stories, but I try to preserve the stories in their authentic form so that they could speak to you where you are. And so I think the most useful thing, if you read this book, is to go through it and then think about where it's calling you, where it's speaking to you, because it's going to expose you. It's going to highlight areas where something in you says, I want to be more like that, or I should be more like that, or that is a way I want to be. So that is the meta lesson from this, in reading it as it was in writing it, is this idea of we're forced to confront what our ideal is and where we're falling short of that ideal. And then as we sort of change our life, that is where you feel it's idea of magnanimity. It means big soul. And there's an association with big souledness in Aristotle with the experience of eudaimonia. Eudaimonia is that like fulfilling happiness of just pure bliss and joy that can only come when you're actively pursuing the ideal inside you. And so what you can take from this book is it gives you the resources to stare in the mirror and see where things need to change, see where you can improve. And then as you start acting on it, you see yourself come more and more alive.
I won't add anything to that. That's a good place to end it. Noah, I want to thank you again for writing this book. Thank you for coming back on the show.
Yes, sir.
It's a real honor. I hope you can tell this is a genuine
that's incredible.
compliment. I really did.
I have to get you a new book. I'll get you a signed one.
Yeah, no, this is one of those ones I love the character because it's cool.
Yeah, dude.
For me,
I already signed that.
Yeah, exactly. I'll remember when this was when I read it. It was when I moved to Austin right as it did. So I'll remember where I was. I like the idea of stories not changing, us changing.
Let me ask you a question. I got to pee really bad.
Yeah.
But I want to ask you a question. So you read it right around the time you moved to Austin. If you reflect on your own life, what would you say what are the treasures you have to return with? So you came here. That's the beginning stages of the hero's journey. You've obviously been here for a few years now.
A year, just over. Just since I first came, just over a year. Yeah.
Oh, but you had like come a couple times before that, right?
No, I left Austin a year ago today, actually,
great.
for the first time.
So year in.
Mm-hmm.
If you think about the idea of transformation as treasure, what treasures have you found since embarking on this hero journey of your own?
That's a really good question.
So maybe this will make it a little bit easier. If you were to go back to where you left, how would you describe, how would you bring the wisdom of how you've changed? What would you say to them? Somebody asked you, like, what's the biggest transformation that's happened since you moved to Austin?
Without trying to quell the thoughts that come to mind, the first thing is more appreciation for the adventure and the uncertainty. So I came to Austin with no job. I literally waited tables at a taco joint while I slept on I'm not exaggerating, while I slept on my brother's hardwood floor, not on a bed, on his hardwood floor. It's 1-bedroom apartment. For 2 months, it was exactly what I needed to know. It was the separation in a way. It was like, okay, well, I know that there's something out there. I need to go do this now. And
the
so
temptation is to go back.
the
'cause you're
temptation
sleeping on a floor. You're
exactly.
like, I could just go back and
I could go stay with my parents, or I could go live in
100%.
Atlanta. I could go get some job that I don't like that will be sufficient from a monetary perspective. But I've chosen to not do that. I've chosen to, in many ways, what I hope to be, enter the forest in the place where there is no path. And even in the last year, like meeting you, I mean, the amount of people that I've met have been green lights in and of themselves. But this book, particularly, was like that glimmer. Like reading these stories allowed me to see that, okay, there is this thing on the other side. There is that shore in that Tempest soul quote. There's that shore that I'm headed towards. So the transformation, I would say, the adventure is, you cannot have adventure without uncertainty. It's the whole point of adventure. So I would just tell myself to lean into it, have fun on the adventure.
Yeah.
Thanks, Noah. This has been awesome, man.
Appreciate you.
Yes, sir. Listen, buy the book. I'm going to leave the book in the show notes. You need to buy the book. If you're a young man, This Way to the Stars, A History of the Hero by Noah Huisman. Buy it on Amazon. The link will be in the notes. Yeah. It's incredible.
I appreciate that. And then also, if you want to just get a sample of my writing, I have a Substack where I write a weekly essay. It's a lot of C.S. Lewis, a lot of not C.S. Lewis, a lot of classical ideas. If you want a sample of what I do, I put one of those out once a week, and that's the Luminorian, which we didn't get to talk about, but it's a project I'm really excited about. So you can, on Substack, Luminorian.
Yeah, I'll link that as well.
Sounds great.
Perfect. Thanks, Noah.
Yeah.